Hi, this is Alana Preston reporting on the Secret of Cosmetics Data 670. This is the final presentation to wrap up and summarize the project in its finality. Just to review, we were looking into the cosmetic industry and wanted to take a critical view to determine what level of self-regulation and safety is currently in place within the industry as a whole. This is a $445 billion business, and we want to really understand what is happening and if they are being regulating themselves in any manner that is similar to the standards that we currently have. So we're going to be aligning chemical exposure information with chemicals and cosmetic data to see how the industry reacts to known chemical safety concerns, and that relates to the OSHA database. And then we're using timeframes to determine if the cosmetic industry is lagging in the removal of harmful chemicals. So we're comparing the dates, seeing if they are falling behind or if they're ahead. And we're also going to take a further look into the safety of cosmetics and make information available to the public. So we're essentially making the report findings available to the public through this presentation. Again, to review the two data sets, we have the chemical and cosmetics data set, and that is from the California Safe Cosmetics Program. The California Department of Health implemented that system and structure. So there's data related to the brand's chemicals and tracked usage of all cosmetic products. There's over 88,000 rows, and that data is specific to California. To complement that data, we have the chemical exposure in the workplace data set, where we have over 500,000 rows, and it includes all chemical exposure cases finalized in review in America. So those are going to be aligning later on, essentially to see what level of our chemical and cosmetics data is being seen in our chemical exposure data, and is there any type of reaction in the cosmetic industry. So for our data alignments, again, we are aligning based off of the establishment name, and then we also have the alignment off of the chemical name. We mostly focus on our alignment based off the chemical name, or the chemicals within the two. So before we started with the analysis, and that has to do with the predictive models and also the data visualizations, we first had to prepare the data for usage. Essentially, that consisted of compiling the data into our cloud database, so DB2 Warehouse, which is a SQL database that's on the cloud through IBM. We had the OSHA files imported from their XML format and aligned so that they could fill up their database, and we also had the database with the cosmetics data. We also performed data cleansing, in which any trailing commas were filtered out. We did a simplification of the chemical names that we used within our data structure, and then also we removed special characters from company names. And that basically gave us a slate for comparison and made it easier for us to connect the two data sets, as well as took away extraneous values. Lastly, we did our data transformation, and that's when we turned our dates into numeric values, and we calculated the difference between the initial date that the report was created and any other following date field. So that would be like the chemical removal field, the discontinued product field. So we just calculated those as a difference between the initial date and when the chemical was removed or the discontinuation date happened. That way we did not have, we had a basis for all of these different fields, and they did not have to be continuous. They could be categorical with prediction modeling later on. Lastly, we made supplementary relationship tables. Essentially, these are just to ease the workload when it comes to trying to align the cosmetics and the OSHA data field or OSHA fields. Because of the parameters between the chemical comparisons, we just had a relationship table so that the two could easily be aligned. So kind of to show a few of the data cleansing rules. So this was the simplified chemical names, and essentially what happened was we had things like carbon black and retinol. We had all these different chemicals that had descriptive values after them that were not essential for alignment for the OSHA data set. So there are only about 18 or so that could all be done manually because they were only a few, and the chemicals, depending on their structure, had to be certain parts needed to be left out. So we essentially took our original list and we gave up with our revised chemical list so that it could be compared between the two. And also normalization occurred. So those variables that I was talking about before, so the ones that are originally dates that are now numeric, we made sure to normalize that. So when we were making our predictive models and visualizations, the data would have similar values and be ready for analysis, essentially. So we did all this in preparation for our main steps, which were the data visualization and data prediction. First, starting with our visualization, we looked at the current state of the cosmetic field in terms of how many instances in our data set, so the chemicals and cosmetics data set, how many instances within that did each company have, and then we narrowed that down to the top 15 companies, and we decided to go between the 2017 and 2018 year. So really looking at the most recent data that we have present and looking at the current state of the cosmetic industry as opposed to the last report, which was from 2009 to 2012, and did not include the data that we had presently, and as well as did not actually list the cosmetic companies in terms of which ones had the most cases registered, which companies were considered the most quote unquote dangerous by the California Department of Health. So for that, we summarized it and we created the list, and it's as seen throughout the visualization. The S company is an S Cosmetics company. They had the highest amount of chemical instances within our data set. It's all one company, and it's 400 more than the next highest ranked company, which was Charlotte Tilbury Beauty Ltd. So there's a big discrepancy between the top percentage, so the top company, cosmetics company, and those following. So we can see that it may be an anomaly that this company has so many chemical instances, and it's not a standard for all of the cosmetic industries to follow. But overall, there was a high chemical usage in this chart shown. So the top 20 companies did have at least over 150 instances of chemical usage each. And the visualizations for this project were actually created with IBM Watson Analytics. So IBM Watson Analytics is a great tool for data visualizations in that you can load in your data that you filtered through RStudio or whatever medium, and then once it's loaded in, you can create a variety of data visualizations and very quickly, and the color scheme and the presentation are more advanced and presentable to a client personnel, as opposed to always creating your visualizations on R and things along those lines, where a lot of programming has to take place in order for whatever visualization that you do create to be presentable and clearly readable in the way that you would like. Also, it makes it hard sometimes in RStudio. It cuts off some of the names and titles, so you can adjust it and it dynamically adjusts in the data visualization for IBM Watson. So if your screen is larger, then you'll be able to see more, and vice versa. So that's kind of a good dashboard also that's accessible to your client, and you can share it that way. So it's a good visualization tool, and that's what was utilized for these. So moving on to our second chart, I wanted to look at the cosmetic usage over time and see how we have evolved as an industry and maybe as a trend in the nation in relationship to our beginning status. So as seen through the chart, we looked at again the cosmetics instances, and we looked over the years, so from 2009 to 2018, and this was again a time lapse, so it kind of tells the number of instances, and they were separated by primary category. So each category within the year is also represented by a different color on the side. So as we look at this, we do see that there was an extreme drop from the 2009 initial date. So for knowledge, the Safety in Cosmetics Act that made this all possible was started in 2006. So 3 years later, we're still seeing a high influx of initial date reports. So in 2009, even if we discredit 2009, where they put all the reports into the database, we still see a high 2010 as the highest reports of chemical usage within the cosmetic industry. And we see that the biggest category of all this is actually makeup products. So that's usually daily usage products for many consumers. And then on top of that, we also have nail products following, with skin following after. So those values and those rankings stay consistent as seen through the data chart throughout the years. So there is no time in which skin products actually overruns the percentages of the nail products usage. But we see throughout time that the makeup industry continues to be the largest portion that includes these harmful chemicals. It is lowering as we continue with time, and that could be in relationship to current trends of organic and pure ingredient listing. But basically this data visualization gives us a nice scope and representation of what categories within the cosmetic industry are the most troubling and those that are causing the most harm. If we're having nail products that make up a majority of the instances, then those aren't used as often. The consumer base is smaller, there's less daily usage and less quantity. So we can't say that their usage and the chemicals within them are going to cause a lot of issues or anything along those lines. But we can say that there are users that have a daily basis of putting the makeup products on their face. And we do know that skincare products, again, are usually used as a daily basis or weekly basis. So we do have those two factors to consider. So moving on to the next data visualization, we take the cosmetics data, so the chemical cosmetic data from the Public Health Department, and we've aligned that against our national data. So the Occupational Safety and Health Administration basically does workplace chemical exposure, and they say if a person has been, or a work office has this amount of the chemical and repeated use, then they fail and they get fined because of it. This usually amounts in the product being removed or discontinued, but in the cosmetics industry it does not. So we're here to see if, based off of the reactions and the trends seen in the banned chemicals that OSHA is declaring banned for work use, which is daily exposure, are these same daily exposed harmful chemicals being removed from the cosmetics industry. And based off of the data, we see that two very concerning chemicals are not being removed from the way they should. So we have the top two, which are toluene and formaldehyde gas. Toluene is not harmful unless in extreme quantities, which you would see at a factory, but formaldehyde is harmful in small quantities and can be toxic over prolonged usage. So we have those two instances, and then we also have titanium dioxide and triethanolamine. So all of these chemicals are our top contenders. We also have for our data visualization, we go by the number of times it's been aligned to chemicals in the workplace exposure cases, and that's our inspection number, so that's what's being measured, as well as the categorized by the chemical name and split by the primary category. And we did this data set from 2016 to 2018. 2016, we decided to use 2016 because that was after the last batch of data was utilized in all reports. So we're filling in the gap of knowledge. And then if we look more specifically, again, going back to the chemicals used within this data visualization, we also see that the formaldehyde is being used in nail products and baby products, which can be concerning because baby products should not have formaldehyde, as it is a toxin, and the use in baby products can have detrimental effects to growth. And there's a large movement to get formaldehyde and lead and other toxins out of children, and the act has been enacted. So again, just to summarize some of the top dangerous chemicals and what they do so that there's more of a scope to the data visualization, we have formaldehyde, which has already been banned in paint and other substances for over 40 years. It's harmful in prolonged exposure. It is a known cancerogen and toxin. We also have titanium dioxide. It's used in a lot of sunscreens, debated in the community as whether it is harmful or effective. But it is something that we need to look at because in large quantities, a lot of these chemicals are toxic. We have triethanolamine, which has a lot of restrictions. It's a binder that's used in a lot of makeup. Can't be used in excess of 5%. It must be washed off daily because of its long-term effects. And this means that those who have a tendency to break out after they use a makeup product and it's been on their face after a day or so, this could be the reason to that, as well as those who just break out after prolonged use of 10 hours or plus. It's because the triethanolamine that's used as a binder for makeup is not supposed to be on the skin permanently and is supposed to be removed eventually. So moving on to our predictive models. So starting out, using the same software, IBM, they do have a spiral predictor in which they have a Watson analytic algorithm in which they pinpoint the top drivers that push for the predicted value. So for our case, we're trying to predict if a chemical is being discontinued or removed from a product after a known workplace exposure case. The OSHA database has identified it. So we're trying to see if it's been removed and then how long after its removal is that in comparison to the known OSHA cases. So for our data set, it looked at this and it did a number of 15 different statistical tests and found the top drivers, which are to the right. So these are the top predictors, and based off of the percentages and the breakdowns within the top predictors, you can see which one you could use as a prediction used to build and to implement a prediction model. Each one, the downside is you have to go through all of them manually in order to see which ones are actually viable solutions, and a majority of them do not have any categories in which you can identify true results. So that's why when we break it down, which is the next stage, next slide, we have chosen work cases, so the number of workplace incident reports, so those OSHA files that relate to a specific chemical is our one predictor that has worked the strongest for predicting the number of cases. And then we see that the products with the number of related cases between 326 and 652 cases were the only ones that were identified as the formula changing being true, which means the chemical was removed or discontinued. The significance of this is that we see in our extreme values, so when we have over 1,000 different work incident cases where people for prolonged usage have been exposed to harmful chemicals that the OSHA has deemed that is unsafe to be there. When these trends happen, we're seeing that as we get higher into the value, so we get 1,000 cases and more cases, there's no reaction by the cosmetics industry. And even when we do have cases, we don't get a reaction until 326 to 652 cases of chemical exposure have happened. And that, okay, moving on to our decision tree model. So this was actually done within RStudio. So for RStudio, using the RPART formula, we built out, we split the data into training and test data sets. We put the data into the RPART formula, and we were able to create a prediction model that could split the data in a way that we could be able to predict if it was, we could be able to predict if a formula change happened, so if that chemical was discontinued or removed. For the actual tree, there's only two variables in which were able to be used to format the tree, and that is brand name and primary category. We also, brand name made up 97% of the variable importance. So without it, the decision tree and its ability to predict goes down and is not as strong as it is with the inclusion of brand name. And we weighted the model so that those with a false negative had more influence, or we weighted the model so that those with a false negative were given more of a penalty than our false positive values. So this was to help promote the low number of cases, because we only have 324 positive occurrences of the formula change. So when a chemical is discontinued or removed, to help that, essentially, we did it so that false negatives had a higher penalty than false positives. And this model is exemplifying that. And in this way, we are showing that the accuracy is still intact, but the sensitivity in the model goes up when you do this. And that's needed because we really do want to see if there is any commonality between the formula change. So if the cosmetics industry is acting independently, or if it's following the national protocol as seen with OSHA, and its alignment to OSHA and the national trends. So after the last prediction model, so we were able to create that decision tree. Just to go back really quick, the accuracy of the model was 99.4%. So with 99.4%, our original decision tree model was able to predict whether or not we would have a formula change value. And then, unlike the previous slide, even previous model from IBM, we are looking now at the brand name and primary category as the two deliverables. When we look at our last model, which is the logistic regression model, which cannot use the brand name because it is categorical and contains over 2,000 categories, which restricts its usage. When we only get to look at primary category, our accuracy of our model goes down, and it's unable to collect any of the percentage or any of the occurrences for true formula change values. We can see that the highest so if we look at the right and we look at the z value along with the PR greater than the absolute value of z, we see that some of the hot top predictors for our formula change are the shaving products, and we have the hair care products. Those are the biggest descriptors, but this model in general is not accurate because it's not able to identify any of our formula changed values. It's been adjusted. The weights have been changed in order to try to force the prediction of these formula change values, but the logistic regression model is still unable to. But this model was selected because it's a binary model. It's looking at the log odds in order to determine coefficients and together trying to classify the data so that it can identify which are positive results and negative results. It sadly was not able to do that. It was adjusted numerous times, and it really at the end of creating the logistic regression model, it was decided that more information was needed in order to move on with any more modeling. There needs to be more inputted data in terms of possibly product cost, chemical penalties within chemical usage and fines, to look at chemical cost in itself, and collect all this data to see if there's any commonality between the formula changed. And it may just be that there is no prediction model available, because if there's no actual patterns within the cosmetics industry, if they're not being regulated, and if they're not continuing to do their correct diligence, then it may not be able to be predicted. And it may very well be that we may have to wait in order to get any prediction values. There are only 324 cases of the formula actually being changed, where out of all of those, out of the 88,000 total company products, and out of the 82,000 rows that were used in the predictive modeling after data cleansing, there are only 324 cases of there are only 324 cases of data where a chemical was discontinued or removed from all those potentially hazardous instances. This caused difficulties in the prediction modeling because we had to weight everything in order to be able to find out if there would be an ability to identify the unknown case, those formula change cases. Also, the anomalies didn't seem to follow a clear pattern. It wasn't as if they were able to, it wasn't as if the anomalies were highly distinguishable. On top of that, a lot of as seen with the first model with all the drivers, which I'll actually go back to really quick just to explain my point. There is a high amount of association between these variables, like the difference between data being updated and new reports being released, as well as the chemical count. A lot of the predictor values are interchangeable, and that can make it difficult for any model to be created for this data set. But this is not known until after you perform the initial analysis. Also, the brand name was a strong predictor, and its removal from any data set was difficult as well. But the brand name is really just an identifier for companies, so it's identifying that certain specific companies have a higher likelihood of removing and changing their chemicals, which is beneficial to consumers because they are removing harmful and dangerous chemicals. There are a lack of product changes despite work exposure cases. So we see over 500,000 work exposure cases. There are more than 324 aligned. 324 was the number of actionable formula changes, but there are alignments that surpass that amount. But companies did not react. We didn't see any relationship between besides our first prediction model between work incident cases and removal. And even with the original model, it was only able to predict within the 352 to 652 range. So the prediction capabilities for this data set are limited. And in general, the cosmetics industry is not reacting as strongly as first predicted to any of the stimuli. It was known, or it was thought, that the cosmetics industry would most likely lag behind, and there'd be a relationship that in which the cosmetic industry would always be behind what was being submitted to the OSHA data set. So the national standards, it was always going to follow behind. But based off of the initial research right now, it seems that the cosmetics industry is not following any trends and has a cycle that is very unregulated, because there's no changes in which that cosmetics industries are attempting, in this case, to remove their chemicals that have been known to have harmful side effects. Again, the companies within this data, just to note as a final point, the companies within these data sets, as mentioned previously through the presentation, the companies within these data sets do not support pure inorganic sourcing for their cosmetic industry. These are usually cheaper products, and they do not list their ingredient list, things along those lines. So it is important to understand that this is not all cosmetic companies and things along those lines. These are some of the most harmful cosmetic companies. So with that, we've kind of opened the light and shared publicly the secret of cosmetics. Hope you enjoyed the presentation and that you were able to gain some knowledge that you didn't have before. There's a lot to go over and a lot to discuss, and I wanted to communicate it clearly to everyone. Overall, what we really see through this whole database, to wrap everything up, is a field that is unregulated, and the data that's being presented shows that the unregulation has promoted less action within the industry. Companies aren't reacting, they aren't changing their formulas, and then when they do change their formulas, it does not seem to be regulated to safety, or does not seem to be promoted by safety concerns in the data based off of our data set. Proprietary concerns can be looked at, or other possible predictors can be looked at, but safety currently, with the amount of data, predictive knowledge, and power that we currently are in use for this project, has not been proven. So we have not proved yet that there is any connection between the national standards of safety and the cosmetics industry. Thank you for listening. Again, this is Lanaya Preston.